thank you very much, Dan, for your description. I mean, you pretty much said almost everything. We really want to thank the Architectural League for the invitation and to have the opportunity to show and share our work with you. And what the project we are going to see tonight, they are very representative about our whole engagement with architecture, that they go through very, very small projects to very big urban projects. And also what I want to say is that why Arquitectura 911, and everyone thinks that it's because of emergency. It has to do with emergency, but it has to do at the beginning because it was the number of the building we used to work in for almost 9 years. Now we moved and the number is different. So everyone is asking us, are you going to change the name of the firm? Say, well, we are staying with the 911 because it also has to do with whatever Dan described that about emergency, about the social, about the political, and that we really need to do things, act fast, think fast, and deal with all the Mexico problematic. So I will let Jose run you through the whole project. Thank you.
In a way, I have this theory that the only way that we got this recognition has to do with the emergency and emerging voices. And as Saidee has said, we're both, the name is tongue-in-cheek, but also about the way we approach the work and the way we approach the city. Basically, we live and work in Mexico City. Different from other emerging voices practicing in Mexico, all of our work is in Mexico. And I do think this makes a difference because in the way we've approached the architecture, we like to think we are informed by the city, and we're interested in seeing how architecture can transform the city. In a way, it's very urbanistically driven. And this concern, what we talk about when we talk about Mexico City, this is the Nuremberg Plan, or Cortes Plans 1524. And for us, the interest is how you get from here in the 16th century to this in the beginning of the 20th century to a city that has grown from 325,000 people in 1900 to 20.1 million people today in less than 100 years. So Mexico City is, in a way, the city of a 20th century. It's a 20th century production. But within this production, we have to understand how architecture has related to what has happened in the city. And the history of the city is a city of boom and bust cycles. Every 6 years, for almost 60 years, there was a crisis after the presidential election. And this graphic, which is a project we did for the curatorial show at the Center for Architecture, it was an exhibition called Mexico City Dialogues, in a way explains this relationship between architecture and architectural production, both with the demographic and the urbanistic changes. And Mexico City, in a way, one tends to assume certain things about the city. We tend to think it's the largest city in the world, which it isn't. We tend to think it's the most polluted city in the world, which it isn't either. But nevertheless, as Carlos Monsiváis says, we Mexico City citizens, we like to brag on a kind of chauvinism of the catastrophe. And this chauvinism of the catastrophe can be explained as it relates to infrastructure. This is a photograph by Héctor Garcia showing one of the recurrent floods in the city in the 1950s, but also very much connected to almost the geologics of the city. This is the 1985 earthquake, toppling one of the most important, a very important building and a very important complex in Tlatelolco. But the same goes about pollution. And in spite of the fact that pollution has receded in the last 20 years, this imaginary still very much construct the way we approach the city. And hence the idea of emergency. And hence the idea that we understand architecture that operates somewhere in between protest as a way to challenge status quo. This is a 4 million people march 7 years ago to protest violence and insecurity in the city, but also other ways of protesting. This is one of the most dramatic cases of exclusion in Mexico City, which is a gated community where actually the notion of gatedness becomes a territorial action to separate a segment of society through a tunnel going into a completely different ravine. So with these conditions, how does architecture engage, or how does architecture resist the city? Or how does architecture relate to this very difficult territory to map, to plan, to imagine, to construct? And this is, in a way, some of the tasks that we have approached from our office.
Well, this is a new building we moved in, and we chose this building because it's a very important building, very modern, iconographic building. So also it's really close to where we live. So be close in a city like Mexico City it really makes a big difference. So this is a place we are working now. We are around a group of 16 people, growing sometimes, I would say the most to 24 people, and the smallest to 10 people. So that's the physical space where we work now.
And as Saidee was saying earlier, if we had to describe the focus of our work, it's really the lack of focus. And I say we've done things from 40 square meters to a master plan of 600 hectares. We're doing institutional, we're doing exhibitions, curatorial work. But this, in a sense, this lack of focus has become a strength for us because it allows us to move freely within many spectrums, not only of scale, but thematically and in terms of the issues we approach. And it has become also a way to be resilient in regards to changes and economic, political, but even client demands. So within the last 4 years, where the world economy has taken where we've been able to sustain these 16 people that Saidee was talking about. If there's one thing that defines our approach to architecture, is that we're interested in connecting the physical with the social. This is a photograph of Tlatelolco, the most important project by Mario Pani, 13,000 units of housing done in 1963. And this is, and the side on the photo on the right is it's a few minutes before the massacre in Tlatelolco, just 5 years after it opened. So, in a sense, if Corb was asking in the 20s whether it was architecture or revolution, we subscribe to that tradition that architecture can make a difference in connecting the physical and the social. And we have to see where can autonomy be relevant and where can engagement and resistance be relevant. We're going to show a number of projects which deal with these issues, and every time we show a project or a constellation of projects, we'll talk about some of the issues and the context in which it was created.
This was a competition we were invited by Fernanda Canales as well, so we make a team with her. And this is a school design in Monterrey. And what it was very, very, very pretty much interesting of this site was the whole landscape. At some point we have the mountains at the back, but we also have a river in front. So how we deal with these natural conditions?
It's interesting, I was telling Anne earlier that in this competition, it was a restricted competition. The 4 other teams were previous emerging voices, which we're glad that we beat them. But to try to imagine why this is relevant for us, it's a competition among very dear colleagues, but it has to do with almost a strategic approach to the competition itself, and then further on with the building. It's a building that got built under 4,500 pesos per square meters, which, to put things in perspective, is like $30 a square feet of construction. So it's basically a decorated shed, if you can call it like that. And within this notion of a very tight budget and a very tight schedule to develop it, because it has to be designed and built within a 1-year frame. You finish school, we start designing in August, and by August of the next year, before the new school year arrives, you have to finish the project. So the project and the construction. So it has to do. It's a project that has to do with achieving critical mass. It's a 5,000 square meter building. It's let's call it. It's a private school somewhere in between a university and an extended art school, but it has to do with, on the one hand, congestion, but also fragmentation. How can we construct and put together the 5,000 square meters and achieve critical mass? But on the other, how can we begin to have these small differentiations that relate the profile of the building to the campus, to the program, in which these openings begin to relate to the either the cafeteria, the library, or the other spaces of the school.
Also, it was very important about the whole program, how the people use this space. That was a very important issue. Try to create like a community where the classrooms are facing the exterior, but all the social programs are like in the heart of the building, and that's why this fragmentation of the openings related. You have like both a relation, the interior relation, also the exterior relation to the landscape, and to open these windows were like a very important issue in a place like this.
This is a cafeteria, one of these arms extending out of the box, and then there's this central space. Again, in spite of not being the first competition we won, it's really the first big commission in which we made a jump from sort of having ideas about how to deal with the client, how to communicate certain thoughts about architecture, budget, client relationships in a very specific site such as it is Monterrey. And here's another picture at night. And the next break we're going to talk about is the expansion of the Spanish Cultural Center. It's really the oldest project we're presenting today, but one which is, again, relevant for us. We were invited by Javier Sanchez, one of the most talented and prolific Mexican architects and a very dear friend of us, to develop this competition in a specific part of the city. This project, in a way, addresses many of the issues, the problematics, the limits of the work we do. But in a way, we can do a forensic exam of the building and see where it goes right, where it goes wrong, and how it relates to other work that we have done in these past 10 years. First of all, it's on the Historic Center, a place which, up until a few years ago, was almost all abandoned. This is an image of how street vendors had taken over most of the streets of the Historic Center. So it's a building which all the streets are bustling, but then all the buildings are empty. So it's like an inversion of the traditional infrastructure versus building. And it's in a fantastic site just behind the cathedral. So in a tiny strip connecting two streets, the streets of Guatemala and Donceles, this building begins to be understood as a passage. How can architecture perform urbanistically? How a transformation of type, which is the type of the Galeria, how can we begin to embed it with other qualities of contemporary architecture, such as density, such as the overlap of a sectional programs, and related to the needs of a contemporary cultural art center, such as it is with the Spanish Cultural Center. Another thing which is relevant, it is a building for a foreign country, so the client is not Mexican. The parameters of working, communicating, dealing with the production of this building, in a way explain why it has taken almost 8 years to develop it, but also, if not explain, at least open up the limits of the building. It should be said that it is the first building out of scratch that has been done in the Historic Center in over 30 years. So one of the reasons has to do with historical preservation. The thing about the Historic Center is relevant because it's a place that, regardless of the fact that over 50% of the buildings have been produced in the 20th century, there's not a single building of the 20th century which is considered of historical worth. So there's a kind of a schizophrenia between what you think is relevant to an environment and how you approach the preservation laws to protect it. So it was a project that took many, many years just to jumpstart from the ground, very complex negotiations, and negotiations that some, in a way, have to do with traditional understanding of adaptation to the 18th century building, to the 20th century building, but also to the program, and very much to the cathedral, which is our immediate neighbor to the south. But then at the same time, one has to resolve the problems of a cultural center program. So this stacking up of programs, this resection in which we have a number of things appearing from service to a site museum. Obviously, any place you dig in the historic center, there will be an archaeological site to be found. The interesting thing is that in the process of building this almost 30 feet deep well, there was a platform, a pre-Hispanic platform, which had to be supported from underneath and then dug underneath to build services and then reinstate this as a site museum. On top of that, there's what they call the Space X, which is an auditorium or multi-purpose space. There's gallery, there's classrooms, and there's a projection room. So to negotiate with under a very tight straitjacket, became the driving force for this project. And of course, the idea that you could circulate from one street through the building and exit on the other side of the street became also a driving force. And the plans, in a way, explain these complexities, both structurally, because we had to have almost 60 feet wide spaces without columns for the auditorium, but at the same time done under very bad terrain because of both water and subsidence. So the building tries to negotiate this and organize this as a section, and just on top of the service service spaces at minus 10 meters, we have this archaeological museum, which on top of that, it has the entrance and gallery space, an auditorium which can be used as a multi-purpose space. On top of that, a gallery space for exhibitions, which faces the cathedral to the north and extends into a terrace. And on top of that, a space which is used for seminars. And on top of that, a terrace. So to understand, again, the limited successes of this project, or the successes of this project, has to do with, again, working under the tight constraints of political, historical preservation, and even economical maneuvers to get these things done. And in a sense, we're happy with the way the building came out. Two projects which are related to this action and in a way started a little bit later, but were finished much earlier, are the Offices for this Guy. This is a project we did with Anton Garcia Abril of Ensemble, in which the Offices for this Guy were taking on what used to be one of Hernán Cortés' houses, a 16th century home property which got extended in the 18th century. And we had to intervene to turn into an office and, again, a cultural space. Under the magnifying glass of people from preservation committees, from multiple levels of government, which were making sure we didn't do anything to endanger what's considered historical heritage.
Yeah, if we go back, then you can see that we were not able to build all the way into the front of the building. We have to retract back so that they say we are not dealing with the context. So those are the things that happen in downtown Mexico City.
And it's interesting because we learned, after working in this project, we learned to pick our fights. If the first project became quite aggressive in terms of, or ambitious in terms of how to operate in the historic center, and then it gets, if not trickled down, but then we get to negotiate reality. In this other project, we decided to focus on the inside, on a relationship between new elements and old elements. Be very careful about restoring the old elements, working with the masonry workers, with the people that know exactly how to preserve, whether it's wood, plaster, or masonry, but then have an interesting dialectic relationship with the glass, with the frosted glass, and with the salam wood. And it has to do with these small moments in which, for example, the entrance space gets all cladded in wood, or the auditorium becomes just an adaptation of an existing open room facing the street, or the extension of the stairs heads into a terrace, a roof terrace that opens up with these almost 4-meter high walls into the existing city. And this is again a problem of negotiation. It has to do a project in which we again learn to pick our fights. A different project is a project again started after the Spanish Cultural Center, but finished much earlier, in which is a client which seeing all the problems which is to build in the historic center, he decides to build this illegally, basically. Not ask for permits and not tell everyone that you're actually doing a building behind the facade, and that's what for us it's relevant. In some cases it's embracing, in some cases it's resisting the processes of transformation. So in a place really 100 meters away from the Spanish Cultural Center, we have this sort of modern glass and steel box which fits into the facade of another building, and it's adjacent to one of the most important museums, which is San Ildefonso Museum, literally just a block away from the Spanish Cultural Center. So it's not about the form; it's actually about how the process gets done in order to avoid having to ask for permits. I hope this is not being recorded to Mexico, being podcast to Mexico this moment, but in a way, architecture is also politics. Actually, architecture is very much about politics, and architecture is about transforming processes from outside, but also from the inside. And we've been interested in seeing where do you resist and where do you engage. And this engagement becomes crucial in projects that deal with historical environments. We have been glad to be invited by the Ministry of Culture, Consuelo Caesar, who's putting together one of the most ambitious cultural projects in the history of Mexico, which is to actually gather all the main books, the main book collections from the foremost Mexican intellectuals of the 20th century, and organizing them in this 17th century building, which is La Ciudadela, which used to be the former National Mexican Library. So he's inviting over 10 architects, each of them to design one of the collections. We always tease that this can become a freak show, or it can become really a very ambitious project. And we got invited to do the collection of Jaime Garcia Terres. It's literally a 170 square meter intervention, just interiors, but one in which the building next to the collection next to us is being done by Javier Sanchez, and the one on the other side is being done by Bernardo Gomez Pimienta. And it's interesting to see how this, at the same time, collaborative processes, but simultaneously understanding of a site and a context can take many different guises. This is actually in the process of getting finished. It's a project that deals with 3 actions, which is to build these 3 very heavy, very let's call very heavy boxes. One of each wall, which become bookcases, and a third one suspended from the roof, which becomes this light device. And they establish a relationship with the existing building and let me go back, as a kind of a bento box in which you do like a tray, which is independent of the existing building, and then you have these elements somewhere in between furniture and architecture. And this will get opened in the month or so.
I think what was very interesting about this project that all of us were given, all the architects participating in this project were given the same space. So it's just very interesting to see how everyone decided to do their own project, basically with the same size, same square meters. So I think it's a good exercise.
The next project, which has to do also with intervention on existing buildings, has to do also with a kind of political action, and it's the transformation more than renovation of the Siqueiros Public Art Gallery. Siqueiros, as you may know, is one of the most important Mexican muralists, one of the foremost 20th century Mexican artists. But similar to other muralists, a fellow very much engaged with politics. He spent some time in prison. And for us, the most interesting part of Siqueiros' persona has to do with this rapport between public transformation, let's say the physical transformation of public art, vis-a-vis the public transformation of society. In other words, for him, art had a transformational agenda, which extended to the way he inherited after he died his collection. He opened a public gallery, which became the Sala de Arte Público, which used to be his house studio. Similar to many other home studios in Mexico, over the years, it got transformed. It got another level. It had a different set of transformations at the facade, at the interior, and this was the environment that we were faced a couple of years ago. Not only the way that vegetation had taken over the building, creating even problems in terms of insulation and humidity, but this was through a series of interventions, the way that the entrance was configured and the way that the gallery space had been established. There was an interest to connect the Siqueiros agenda, the idea of this canonic muralist, to the idea of contemporary art. And in the last 12 years, that agenda has been played out in many different guises. The new director, Tayane Pimentel, invited us to think of how can this relationship be taken to a next level, and how could we think incrementally in a number of transformations that not only would change the space as a one shot, but allow for further transformations to happen over time. And in a way, we thought about an incremental master plan, a master plan of small actions with budgets of less than $50,000 each time. And each of these transformations could add up every time you did something else. The first one had to do with a complete reassembly of the public space and entrance. And the second one had to do with the recovery of the courtyards. And in doing such, we were, and this is if we had to define very cynically what is that we did, we basically tore down 2 walls. But in that operation, what we were able to do is to regain that publicness of Siqueiros art. And we created an infrastructure for the facade to become a space for art projects. This is Post Miseria, project by Artemio. And in a way, by taking away these 2 walls, we brought down the murals back to the street, which is where Siqueiros always wanted them from the start. And it's literally demolition and a paint job, and a little bit more than that. But in the processes, in the months or a year and a half since it has been open, it has allowed for this sort of growing and development processes in which new artists, this is Roman Signer, Swiss artists, have begun to occupy both the space, the facade, and the gallery in a different fashion. And for us, this is the real power of architecture. Really, architecture for us starts the moment the architect leaves. It starts with the drawing, ends with the building, then starts again with the occupation. And that for us is quite interesting. How can one either hang a kayak, place overturned chairs, or allow for the murals to extend outside into the street again? The second stage has been the demolition of this wall, which has liberated this fantastic stair and ramp, giving a new meaning to the courtyard. So this is, again, super tiny intervention, but at the same time capable of multiplying tenfold the audience of people and visitors to the museum, and connecting for the first time in a long time the agenda, the political agenda of Siqueiros and the social agenda of transformation of Siqueiros with the agenda of contemporary art. The next project we're going to show is Iztacalco Urban Housing Project, and it's an important project for us. It's again, this is one of the projects which are relevant for in terms of performative level, what it has done for housing and what it has done for certain developers, rather than by its iconography. And to understand this, we have to understand the systems of production of housing in a place like Mexico. Mexico City has to get built over 50,000 units of housing get built every year in Mexico City. This is not Photoshop. This is actually happening in the peripheries of Mexico City. This is a traditional model of home building, which is developer-driven, thousands of units simultaneously, cul-de-sacs, which later on get privatized, tiny 2 square meter yards. But then this is the other half, which has to do with informality. My doctoral dissertation and our early research had to do with this relationship between the spatial transformations of the periphery and the way they related to informality. So this is the dilemma that we face in Mexico. Where do you operate? How do you transform the reality of the production of housing? You can either address the bottom part of the photograph, or you can either address the upper part. For us, really, the most interesting part is really the threshold between these two. Why is this model, which has transformed the metropolitan area in many years, why it is getting transformed itself informally? So you have these homes, which over the first 2 years get transformed informally to many other uses and even extensions. But at the same time, the interesting thing about this is that you have maybe 3 or 4 major home builders which are building tens of thousands of units a year in the valley. So how do you convince the guys who are doing this to do something else? And this is where actually we think about engagement. And this is where actually we move from resistance to use, if not only information, as Dan was acutely saying, but also our academic experiments to say that it is possible to have another option. And this option is not in itself political or social, but it comes from architecture, or from the autonomy of architecture, which is to think about morphology and to think about typology. And it's really to reinsert into the imaginary of these developers, which for over 40 years have forgotten to build a block, to build dense urban housing, close to subways, close to bus corridors, close to other services and infrastructures.
This work was commissioned by one of the biggest developers in the whole country, not just in Mexico City, but in the whole country. And I would say that our task was to convince them not to occupy the whole site. We told them that that's why all these exercises are doing that, trying to explain them that probably we can get the same number of units by leaving more open space, and that was like the big exercise we were trying to convince them, because people need space, and we are very used that housing. Low-income housing has to do with tons of units, all the same, all like next to each other with no open space. So we think that it's very, very important that we create nice spaces for people living there. So we convince them for the last sketch that we should create blocks, and these blocks create some patios, big patios that are almost like 30 meters by 16 meters, 475
745.
Yeah, families. So this is a complex of 750 units, so divided into 6 patios that can create like this big unit, but small units in itself. separated. So you don't really need to go and have all your neighbors next to you. So we divided this into 6 blocks.
So this is literally the guy who does this one day, after 1 year of washing his brain, we said, okay, let's do an experiment and let's think about a different type of building housing. And through these exercises that Saidee explained, we have to take them to the same standards that these people operate in terms of return on investment, in terms of construction costs. So really, to get into that equation is the biggest task. And at some point, they take a leap of faith. But at some point, they actually see that the formula makes sense. First of all, it's, again, like I said, 400 meters away from a subway station, 200 meters away from a bus rapid transit corridor. This changes completely the equation and becomes more appealing, which they can. This is, by the way, $60,000 housing, 59 square meters, but a housing that suddenly, for the people buying the peripheries, rather than spend a quarter of their income in transportation, to actually live in a house with a courtyard, it becomes a big difference. So it's a series of 6 blocks, almost 120 units each of them. It's 5 stories. With another big thing that we managed to convince them is that to invest a bit and to send the parking spaces underneath the street. If you have parking spaces at the surface level, you kill any kind of public and city life. The other major accomplishment is to actually convince them that two on the blocks do mixed use on the ground floor, which adds a completely different quality of life. For you, I mean, for everyone here at the room, you must be wondering, well, this is all about common sense. As we say in Mexico, the common sense is the least common of them all. Because somehow these guys who are building 10,000 units in the periphery somehow get frustrated even at thinking at these things. So they make the leap of faith with us, and to be fair, they considered us in even assuming certain risks that they were not willing to consider into other circumstances. To build this, they started with 2 blocks, and now every single one of the apartments has been sold. And to put things in perspective, with 50,000 units of housing being built in the city each day, last year we received the National Housing Award for this project. It's a minor, in terms of architecture, it changes a little bit. In terms of the way that housing relates to the city, it changes a lot. Because after this project, the CEO of the company told us, well, not only is it getting recognition, it's actually selling faster and is being more profitable than the other model and the previous model of housing. In a way, it's sustainability in an eggshell. And it has to do, again, with these small combinations of public and private, with these minor transformations that instead of having a car parking at this level, you have the parking spaces down there. And it has to do with the way that these spaces can be inhabited in more than one fashion.
I mean, when we think these are just 50 square meters, and when we think that these units are made not for 1 people, it's made out for probably 5 people. So how we get everything in there very, very tiny, and how can we get some light to the whole unit? So these units had 2 side views, and I think that's important. I mean, the public facing is one side, and the bedrooms the other side. Having some middle spaces where we can accommodate a small room, a small studio. But what is very funny is that the norm itself in Mexico City does not allow you to put kitchens without ventilation, natural ventilation, or illumination. So that makes it very, very difficult to solve in a very tiny space, to solve that every single room has nice views at least. So we are like trying to change little by little these little things that really are very important, because you just get probably at most 10 meters of facade. So how do you have to distribute the whole space in these 10 meters long? It's not a simple exercise, but it makes a lot of difference. So how we were also very impressed at how everyone appropriate of this space as different ways. So someone will put the bedroom wherever we design a dining room. So how all these things move around, we learn a lot from that.
And working on the same constraints again has to be built at less than $30 a square feet, and it has to have a return on investment over 22%. And again, just these are some images. I'll go very quickly because we have 5 minutes, but every single one of the apartments is facing these interior courtyards, and each of them will be thematically designed for different uses. And in the process, we think that there's new forms of community that can take place. So in a way, the small physical innovations can have great social innovations. The next project jumps into a more urban scale. And it started as research. It started as a project we did for the Rotterdam Biennale called Visionary Power, in which we were asked to deal with informality. We got commissioned to do a project dealing with informality, but we turned it into a project that also deals with mobility. How the informal project problem is a problem of mobility. How do you get these people to the city? And how do you have a balance between job creation and mobility? 80% of the trips in Mexico get done by public transportation, and 20% is done by private car. And yet it seems that all the policies are done, whether it's the elevated highways that got built a few years back, that are now clogged, they seem to cater that 20%. In spite of small changes, such as the bike sharing program, which has been an incredible success in Mexico, we're still having to deal with the problems of the megacity. And after working for many years in a place like Nesa, first in a doctoral dissertation, then in a biennale, finally someone calls us and tells us, well, you know something about this place, right? And we get asked to do a 22-kilometer long, later a little bit shortened to 18-kilometer long BRT or bus rapid transit, which, as you may know, is the hot item in public transportation in cities. And it is done in a place in which public transportation is absolutely fragmented, and yet the quality of public life in these places is very much related to the lack of planning. In other words, where you don't have planners, urbanity thrives. And it can be manifest in buildings such as this, and with different degrees of development. So you have places like this which would get transformed by the corridor. So is it possible to imagine that this corridor, this 17-kilometer corridor, can become something more than transportation? Can it become public space? Can it engage and improve on the existing BRT systems, such as having an overpass lane, as having a double platform, as even bringing in a new cycleway that connects a number of parks that exist in Nesa? In other words, to think and recognize Nesa and this informal settlement as it is, and just to improve on that. And the miracle is that it is getting built. And it's getting built with the cycleway, and it's getting built in relationship to the public spaces that we imagine. These are photos by Rafael Gamo, who happens to be here in the crowd. We're happy to have you here, Rafa. They show in a way the way that this is structured. There's a people using now the lane of the bus as their cycleway, but to actually see that infrastructure, the way that architecture can improve the settlement has to do with infrastructure. It's quite relevant to us. Very quickly, I know we have 3 minutes. Another project which is a breakthrough project for us is a project for Ciudad Juárez. This project, it's a small master plan, a 25-hectare master plan for the most violent and dangerous city in the world. Literally, Ciudad Juárez in 2011 had more murders per 100,000 people than any other place in the globe. And it's a kind of social Detroit. It has collapsed, and it has shown what the failures of planning and what the failures of the production of public space, such as this empty park, but also the production of housing, how it shows where architecture is failing. Over 30%, depending on who you ask, but between 25 and 30% of the homes built in Ciudad Juárez have been abandoned. What does architecture have to do with that? 2 years ago, we were commissioned to be the curators of the Venice Biennale in 2010. We got invited by the Colegio de Arquitectos, and we decided to do a project called "What Else Can Architecture?" What else can architecture do? Which was a play of words on the previous project of the 2008 Art Biennale. And at some point, the project got censored because someone in the federal government didn't want us talking about Juarez. A Biennale should be about celebration. A Biennale should be showing the landmark architecture of a country, we were told. And we were asked to either change the project or drop the Biennale altogether. So we decided to drop the Biennale. Let's call it light censorship. But the Mexican pavilion stood empty for the 2010 Biennale. But then the irony is that 4 months later, people from the Ministry of Social Development, they tell us, so you know a thing or two about Juarez. Now we want you to do a real project in Juarez. So as I was saying earlier, to misquote a French philosopher, you have a rock. Sometimes you can break a window, but sometimes you can build a wall. And our practice is based on this notion of breaking windows. And breaking windows can be the exhibitions, can be the biennales, can be the research, can be the teaching. And the building walls have to do with projects that address the constituent problems of a city such as Juarez. On the one hand, you have security, that idea that safety, police power is what changes reality. Here's the president announcing the program Todos Somos Juarez. But on the other, you have the idea that physical planning changes the city. That to change this environment, it is not about to make this environment better in terms of quality of life. It's not about more policemen. It's not about bringing the army into the streets. But it's actually about engaging society in a different fashion, to change the protocols of architecture. We held a number of community workshops with over 200 people attending, that themselves, and a number of walking tours to try to get the sense of what is it that drives, on the one hand, the perception of problems, but also the possible solution. And we worked with these people for many weeks to see if our understanding of how public space, housing, and infrastructure could work together, and how that drawing by the community could get transformed into a plan that addresses infrastructural problems, such as a water basin, addresses problems of social infrastructure, such as a building of workshops, but also this rapport between informal housing and state-driven housing. This is one of the basins was used for sports, the other one for a skate park. The project's still on hold. It received the Holcim Bronze Award in Latin America a few months ago. But in a way, it sort of places this idea that for us, architecture is politics. And to think that architecture can transform society in a more intelligent or strategic fashion is really crucial for us. And to talk briefly about two projects that we're building. One of them is the Churubusco Film Labs and Producers Building, which is a building it's a 10,000 square meter building in the equivalent of the Universal Studios in Mexico City, in which we're bringing together the Office of Producers with the Film Labs so that they could be operating in the same space simultaneously. This is a project commissioned by the Ministry of Culture. Again, it has to do with this sectional overlap of programs and how these sectional overlaps can allow for some other forms of public life to appear. The dark precast stone, black stone is the labs, which is like a bunker, and then the iceberg-like volume on top is the offices. And in between, you have this sense of a new public life arising. The other project, which is again the result of a competition, with three of the finalists were again emerging voices of a few years back, but it's a project getting built in Guadalajara right now, which is a performing arts center, and it has to do with a complexity of programs because it's almost 35,000 square meters, dealing with consultants here in Connecticut, consultants in Guadalajara, in Mexico, and a project that although it was won three years ago, almost 4 years. it's just breaking ground. And it's a project where the slow and the fast are combined. The new Snoeta Environmental Science Museum will get built here. This is the Auditorio Telmex by Jose Moyao, the National Library by Toca Greenberg and Lopez Guerra, and this is the project we won. And this, again, just a few images of how the project is sort of structured as a series of boxes, again, very dumb boxes in terms of putting together the program and getting the most out of a budget. Literally to think of the budget explained and developed only on a very thin strip of either glass or concrete. And this is the construction as it stands right now. In a way, this is our hero and anti-hero, and we don't mean this just because the booze and the sex at the office, but it has to do with the fact that for Don Draper, in one of his most famous lines, he says, actually, to the guys demolishing Penn Station to build Madison Square Garden, he says, if you don't like what is being talked about, change the conversations. We think that architects are in the possibility of changing, expanding, and transforming the conversations that go on socially, politically, and within the realm of our profession. If we can only aspire to that sense of coolness, and as Don Draper has, I think the profession will be better off. Thank you very much.
Thank you.